Hey guys, today's podcast is super cool and it's a little bit different. One of my email subscribers reached out to me and asked me some questions about a citizen science project that they're part of. And specifically, it's the City Nature Challenge. And I answered some of his questions on a call that we had, but I thought it would make a great idea for a podcast. So this episode, this video is all about citizen science from the participants' perspective. I interview George Gehrig about his participation in Bioblitzes and how he is organizing the City Nature Challenge this year and how you can participate as well. We also talk about how the science really benefits scientists, but also beyond science. This is super helpful for citizen scientists as well to inspire people to get into conservation and to care about our natural world. Now, I do use the word citizen science a lot, and through all my stuff I use citizen science. I understand now that this does deter people who are not citizens from participating. You do not have to be a citizen to participate, and I am changing over to using the word community science. So I hope you enjoy this episode. Well, thank you, George, for coming on the podcast. I'm so excited to chat with you today.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here with you. And as we were talking before the recording started, I am feeling a little imposter syndrome because I'm a layperson talking and a non-wildlife biologist, and I'm talking to the experts. So it's just a real joy to have this opportunity to exchange some ideas with you.
Well, thank you. And anyone can become a wildlife biologist. That's what I say. You just have to persevere enough. You have to just really want it and go for it. So you are organizing a City Nature Challenge this year, correct?
Correct.
Can you tell people what the City Nature Challenge is? And you've been a long-term participant of one as well.
So it's complicated. I worked in an academic health sciences center with its own ecosystem for most of my adult life. And a couple of years ago, I had an opportunity to retire, and I just pulled the trigger. And I have always been called to the mountains, so I moved to North Idaho, where I'm at right now. When I was working, I always had a passion for the outdoors and education. So one of the organizations that I joined was the Master Naturalists. And it was through the Master Naturalists that I was introduced to Bioblitzes. And through Bioblitzes, I became aware of a City Nature Challenge, but I've never organized one and I've never participated in one. So that's another reason why I feel a little imposter syndrome, because I'm putting one together, but the neat thing is it's never been done in the state. So,
in the entire state?
For the entire state.
Oh, right? Wow. That's great.
Yeah. So for the first time,
it's great that you're doing the first one.
Well, so, what's been so good is, when I got involved in the planning process, I noticed that another city in Idaho was also participating. And I have to give a shout out to Christian Nojeski from Boise Parks and Rec. They tried to do it last year, but COVID interrupted them. And so when I saw her on the list, I reached out to her and we began collaborating, and she's been extremely helpful. She's got a wildlife background. And I noticed too, for the first time, there was a small city in Montana that was participating. And I really need to give a shout out to Courtney Long, who's working with the city of Red Lodge, Montana. So the three of us it's first time for all three of us. And so we've been collaborating and helping each other, and we formed like a little mini competition between us, which is turning out to be really fun. That's
great. Yeah. And so for those of you who don't know, can you explain what a Bioblitz is?
Well, so a Bioblitz is an example of a citizen science project where people go out and document the flora and fauna of a particular area, a specified, pre-specified area over a specified period of time.
And so the City Nature Challenge is pretty much the same thing, but on a citywide scale. Is that how you would describe it?
See, that I think that's one of the stumbling blocks, really, especially for my project. When you start a City Nature Challenge project, one of the first things that you have to do is decide the boundary. And so I chose to do the entire county, Bonner County, Idaho. And so when you're trying to pitch it to people that we're doing a county-wide Bioblitz, but it's under the name City Nature Challenge, you have to do a little educating. And it started, in case people don't know, as a competition between Los Angeles and San Francisco back in 2016, 2016. And since then, it's grown to this year. The projection is to have 359 cities from around the world participating. So as far as I know, it's the largest Bioblitz in existence.
And is it run by iNaturalist? Is that correct? Because all of the data is logged on iNaturalist, right?
So again, it was a combination effort between the California Academy of Sciences and the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County. They came up with this app, iNaturalist. And again, I have to really take this opportunity to call out Allison Young of the California Academy of Science, Isla Higgins and Amy Jones of the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County. Those three are the ones that basically organized the City Nature Challenge. And we use the iNaturalist app to document flora and fauna during the Bioblitz.
And for those of you who don't know about iNaturalist, it's this super cool app where you basically take pictures of anything living, and it has an AI function built into it. So if you have no idea what it is, I mean, of course you could just upload it as like something, there literally is a category of something, but usually you're able to say that it's like a fungi, a plant, or an animal. And they have, like I said, the built-in AI that helps you identify it. And it's so cool how close the matches are, and you can choose from that. And then I don't know if you've used Seek. Seek is their new app. Seek, I love Seek, but you really can only use it for slow moving things or plants, which are stationary. But you take your phone and you hover it over the organism, and it identifies it for you in real time, and then you can post it to iNaturalist through the app.
Well, it's a little bit complicated going from Seek to iNaturalist, but you can do it. But you're right. The difference between the two, I like to think of Seek as iNaturalist's baby brother or baby sister. You don't need an account, whereas you do need to set up an account with iNaturalist. And with iNaturalist, you have to be 13 or older to create an account. And like you said, both of them work the same way. You take your phone camera, or you can use a digital camera and save the images to your computer and upload those to iNaturalist too. But basically, you point it at something, and it will suggest, based on your location, what it might be, and then you can confirm it, or maybe it doesn't get down to the genus and species level. So upload the image, and other people come behind you and that are species specialists, and they will help you identify it. But I think the advantage, and this is what I'm doing, I'm encouraging people to use Seek first, because you don't need an account. And like you said, you hover over something and it will help you identify how close you need to be to get down to the genus and species level. So if you're just far away from something, it might just say a mammal. And then you get a little bit closer and it'll say, well, it's a carnivore. And then if you get a little bit closer, it'll tell you what it is. So it helps you understand what kind of picture you need to take to make a good observation in iNaturalist. They're amazing. They really are. And so I'm encouraging people, since there's a couple ways that younger kids participate in iNaturalist. Typically, a school teacher will create an account for her grade, and then she'll take the kids out and they'll all kind of be making observations. And then so she'll use her account to upload the pictures. But a more family-friendly way, I think, would be to have a parent with the iNaturalist app on their phone and a child using an iPad or an iPhone with Seek, and they could run around and identify things and then encourage their parent to come over and take a picture of it and upload it. So it's a great family building exercise, and just this whole, the reason why I was attracted to the City Nature Challenge is it just is a great community building opportunity, I think. Get people there, you know.
Well, yeah, I definitely want to talk about that, but I just wanted to add with Seek, and it'll also give you like guidance too. So I use it a lot on plants because I'm actually terrible at plants.
Me too.
And and usually I start like directly on the leaf and everything, but then it'll say like, try different angles, and then you do try different angles, and it exactly. Often gets you to species. And you're correct, that is a part of iNaturalist. I forgot to add that the community helps you identify it. So if you mark something as wrong or incorrect, then they will correct it. And usually, I mean, sometimes you have observations that don't get any feedback on them, but if it receives a certain number of responses that are the same from, I think it has to be from special accounts too, and then it gets a research grade. And at that point, then actually scientists can use it for research.
Exactly.
And in our lab, we were talking a lot about how to use iNaturalist data. So it's really important for understanding like timing of things like seasons. So with climate change and changing temperatures, plants are or flowers are blooming sooner. We're seeing insects sooner, snakes sooner. So it helps with that seasonality. It is a really great resource for documenting the spread of invasive species because you can find out to what new areas they go to. And also just changing ranges in general with animals. And you can get some sort of like coarse measure of how common things are depending on the species, but it is hard to get a value for that because so much depends on survey effort. Like you have to go out and do it regularly if you were to do it as a scientist. And I know myself, I usually do it when I'm walking my dogs. So if they're like pulling or there's deer, sometimes I'm doing something, there's deer around or another dog coming. I'm like, I can't do that today. Or I've already, seen that species before and I don't want to upload it again. So there's a lot of different biases. And just one more thing, if you are taking a photo with your digital camera, or you can even use camera traps, make sure you have the location and the date and the time, because those are the key components for the scientific data.
That brings up a couple really good points. One related to the City Nature Challenge, it's this time frame every year, and for northern locations like North Idaho, it's not really the best time because we're just emerging from winter. And so the kinds of plants that Seek will be able to identify and iNaturalist will be able to identify are less because there's less foliage, right? So that's been kind of a challenge too. It's like, why do you call it a city nature challenge, and why are you doing it this time of year? And the reason why I went ahead and decided to try to do this wasn't necessarily to compete with other cities to find the most species, for example, but it was just to introduce people to citizen science and to get them to learn how to use the app so that in the summer and then again in the fall, we'll be able to continue to do bioblitzes and notice the seasonal changes. And hopefully once they realize how easy Inaturalist is to use and how that can contribute to a larger body of knowledge, then they might be interested in doing Nature's Notebook, for example, or the Great Sunflower Project, or all of the other citizen science projects that are out there. So they can begin to incorporate observations and connect or reconnect to their environment through these really easy to use free apps.
I love that. Yeah. I love the fact that it's free, that it's easy. Like, even as somebody genuinely really interested in nature, to buy all the different field guides, and for, animals like insects, which can be really difficult to identify, or plants too. You would need all these different field guides that might be difficult to navigate. So it really breaks down barriers. And I belong to a Facebook group for Carolina wildlife, I think, identification or nature identification. And people all the time are posting pictures there. And it's not necessarily like they're going out all the time and finding this stuff, but it's nice if like something interesting pops up and you're like, what is this? And then you can usually find out right away.
So talking about insects, they move, right? Especially the flying ones. And that's been kind of also an interesting educational outreach. So like, how can you get them to stay still long enough? And you see them flying from flower to flower. Do you try to chase them around until you get a good picture? Or do you find a flower and sit there and wait for the insect to come so that you can take a picture of it? And one thing Courtney has done, she's Courtney Long in Red Lodge, she turned me on to the idea of painting mason jars white and then capturing them in the mason jar. And then, and she has like a ruler along the bottom scale. And then you can take a picture of the insect in the jar and then let it go. So that's
cool.
Yeah.
And then the white provides a solid background so that the AI can probably identify it better, and you can just see it better too.
Yeah.
So we actually never talked about the dates of the City Nature Challenge. So it's at the end of April. When does it start?
So it's April 30th through May 9th, with April 30th through May 3rd being the days when you go out and make the observations. And then May 4th through 9th, you upload them and identify them. And then on May 10th, all of the numbers are tabulated and the results are posted. So,
and sorry, go ahead.
Well, so in the past, it's been kind of a competition where cities challenged each other, but with COVID and the limitations that brought, it's been more of a collaboration. So it's not so much about who's getting the most. It's just the idea of getting people outside. But between Boise and Red Lodge and Bonner County, we're going to have, like I mentioned, a mini competition where, and we're going to have a statue, a trophy made, and the challenge that gets the most people out per capita will get to keep the trophy for a year. And this is kind of a cool little wrinkle, right? We've each picked our own mascot. So Red Lodge is going to have a moose, Boise is going to have a peregrine falcon, and we're going to have a Sasquatch. So Courtney over in Red Lodge worked with a local artist, and we're going to have a metal trophy that has 3 mountains, like third, first, and second, just like on a typical competition platform. And we'll have medallions for each one of our mascots. So we'll be able to move them around from year to year, or, and hopefully we're going to encourage other cities around here. So we'll have additional medallions made. So it's just going to be fun,
Yeah, that sounds. Why'd you choose a Sasquatch?
That's a good story. Well, the Pacific Northwest is known for Sasquatch sightings, and people around here have said that they've seen them, and there are businesses and people around town that have Sasquatch statues. So what we decided to do, kind of a variation on that theme, just for our county, we're going to have a wooden Sasquatch cut out, a silhouette, and we're going to place it in 4 different places in the county over the course of the 4 different days to encourage people to get out. And we're going to have like little Sasquatch trophies made. And so the first person that sees the silhouette and gets 20 observations will get a little trophy.
That's so fun. I love that.
It should be fun. Yeah.
And then getting back to the major city challenge, how do they determine winner? Is it number of species or number of participants or number of observations? Because with the species, and participants, it can be kind of unfair because you have, bigger cities. LA is a huge city, and you also south, you just have, like you mentioned, more diversity, and plus ours is coming out more. So how is any winner established in this?
So typically they have 3 categories: total observations, total species, and total people. And, as Courtney and Kristen and I have talked about, our competition, it's the case that, and one of the things that we're encouraging people to do, there's lots of trails around here. So what we're encouraging people to do is split up into different trails and document as much biodiversity as there are on all the different trails around here. So if you're going to go out hiking anyway, combine the hike with this city nature challenge. But then the question is, in the course of a 9-mile hike, you might see 10,000 ponderosa pines.
Right.
Each of those could be an observation, right? So do we want to encourage people to do that? And then the kind of the reverse is true. What if in a city park there was only 1 ponderosa pine and 50 different people made the same observation, so it gets kind of tricky.
Yeah.
So we just said, we want to introduce people to the idea of a Bioblitz. We want to encourage them to use Inaturalist. So it'll just be the number of people, individuals that get out, and then divided by, the population. And that's how we're going to determine a winner.
And if you do live in a big city, there is nature in cities. LA initiated it. They're a big city, and there are birds everywhere. There are insects everywhere. In LA, there are coyotes. Even there's pumas and cougars, same animal around LA. So just look more closely in your city if you live in a big city.
You're right. But I have a tendency to be kind of a contrarian. And for me, I think that's necessary, but it's not sufficient. I think, or at least this is the angle that I'm pitching the City Nature Challenge from. it's not documenting what's there, but it's identifying and recognizing all of the native plants and animals that we have forced off of the landscape, to recognize what's missing. And as I've promoted the City Nature Challenge, this is kind of the unique angle that I took. I wasn't sure exactly how I was going to promote it, but I decided on a Facebook page. And what I did was I went to the Idaho Fish and Game's website, and they have the ability to download a species list for a county. And so I downloaded that, and I subsorted it into reptiles and amphibians, birds, fish, invertebrates, and mammals. And then I subsorted that by the state rank. And I listed the most threatened species first, just to give, up here, it's the northern caribou or the grizzly bear or the wolverine. I mean, those are kind of the iconic species that are threatened. But what about all of the other ones, that don't get recognition? What about the habitat that we've destroyed for those animals, or because of development we might destroy? So, it was just a way to introduce people to all of the life forms around, so that when they actually go out, they'll have like a baseline information about them, and they'll be able to kind of recognize them. But then as they're out, to recognize all of the animals that they don't see, and that's why I have so many influencers, right? And one of them is Robin Wall Kimmerer. I don't know if you know her, but
Oh, I actually just listened to, she was on Ologies. It's a science podcast, and she was talking about moss. and when you think about it, I was like, okay, moss, like how, and even as a scientist, I was like, how are we going to make this fascinating? Although I knew it was going to be, but she was fantastic. I highly recommend everyone listen to that. And well, you can go ahead, and I'll tell you one more thing I liked about the podcast, but in our no, I was just going to say that, so there's definitely a movement among scientists to incorporate Indigenous knowledge, especially with reference to international work, at least with the United States and Europe. Frequently, white scientists go to Africa. I mean, myself included. I did my research in Gabon and Kenya, go to Asia, and we study things with our method, but the people there, they already know a lot of this stuff. And historically, we have even, taken specimens out of the country and away from them, and not valued and respected or even acknowledged their knowledge. And with conservation, especially, that has really backfired. And scientists really now are starting to recognize the value of that. So she talked about I can't remember what it was about, but about I can't remember what it was, but somehow she talked about like a central knowing, and like that we're all connected. And I think, like, when you think about Indigenous cultures, like, we appreciate that and we can accept that. But for us, I think we feel like we're very disconnected, but we're not. Like, there's still that oneness. And like you said, that like a little app like Inaturalist can help you become a part of that again, or at least that's part of the goal.
Absolutely. And just as an aside, moving to a new place, I didn't know anyone. I didn't have any relatives here. So, and by the way, my path is pretty similar to yours. So I really resonate with your story, and I admire.
You're a fancy scientist too.
No, I'm sitting.
I'm actually not fancy today. I'm in a sweatshirt today.
No, I'm probably the furthest thing from a fancy scientist. But just the fact that you took leaps, and went places where where you were a stranger, you know, and it turned out to be just life transforming experiences. I've had a couple of those in my life, not going overseas, but now that I'm retired, I'm definitely kind of in that phase right now, you know. So when I moved here, I had kind of three strategies. I wanted to first know the Native Americans that had lived on this landscape for tens of thousands of years. And then I wanted to kind of systematically um, learn the life forms that had co-evolved over millennia. And then I kind of did an organizational blitz where I wanted to find out which organizations and which people were doing conservation work. And it's just been it's been a marvelous journey, you know. And for sure, it wasn't until I came up here that I became familiar with Robin's work, but just the whole idea of traditional ecological knowledge um, and looking at things as being sacred, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
coming away from the idea that we're a apart from nature to the understanding that we are a part of nature and that there is a web of life. And for too many people, and I think this is especially true for folks that live in a city, you know, our technology has allowed us to kind of achieve maybe an escape velocity where we don't have to worry, you know, about food and shelter and water and places to raise our young. But all of the other life forms around us haven't had that ability. And so they're just out there struggling, you know, to just live from day to day. And this Robin is going to be offering a Zoom presentation, I think in a couple of days, called "What Does the Earth Ask of Us?" And I think it has the potential, the promise to be just really excellent, because it just gets people to understand that, you know, all we need to do is allow enough habitat for these creatures to be able to cling, you know, to life, and to not fragment and to put even more pressure on populations to survive. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of that. And at the beginning, before the podcast started, we talked about the idea of, again, kind of making a transition away from this idea of citizen science to community science. And you're much more knowledgeable about that, but I'm also a big advocate of that.
Yes, I mean, so really the transition with that is citizen science. I just don't think people thought about the phrase in depth, but it was never meant that you have to be a citizen of the country. But
Right.
here in the United States, you know, we have lots of people who are not officially citizens, but they are more than willing to help out with this. So the scientists and people running these programs are now starting to transition to using community science to be more inclusive. I wanted to add, for the fragmentation and the habitat destruction part, yes, you're absolutely right that decreases biodiversity. But for those people who live in already developed areas, you might be thinking like, what can I do? Or all is lost. And that's not true. So if you own a yard, a front yard and a backyard, there are things that you can do that are actually really important to animals. And when we talk about animals, I mean, so often people think about the big ones, the tigers, the grizzly bears, all of that. But just planting native plants in your yard can bring back insects, and birds feed off of those insects, or birds feed off of the plants. And I mean, you might have some bigger mammals living there, but those communities are all really important. And there is solid research to show that these little green patches, even within big cities, can help migratory birds and pollinators persist.
So you're right. You're absolutely right. And I need to acknowledge my two primary organizers, Mike Bauer with the East Bonner County Library, just an excellent guy and doing great work in the community, and Preston Andrews, who is a professor emeritus and is a member of the Kinnickinnick Native Plant Society. And so he immediately, when I started pitching this idea, he immediately saw how his organization could use the City Nature Challenge to promote to its membership the need to plant natives. And so, one of the goals, and I have several goals, but I think probably, a basic goal would just be to get people to go out onto their property and identify natives versus non-natives. And then using something like Nature's Notebook, observe the numbers and kinds of insects that use the plants on their own property, and then make decisions going forward, to change their landscape to support insects and pollinators. And another huge influencer for me is Doug Tolomei, bringing nature home, and the whole idea of promoting the homegrown national parks, and how each of us could have such a tremendous positive impact on insect populations if we just planted native plants.
Yeah, and there was a study out maybe a year or two now that said we were in a major decline for insect populations, and insects are really hard to get people behind. People are not excited about bringing insects back. Another thing you can do is even just, don't use pesticides or herbicides if you have to in your yard. Every year they knock on my door and they're like, we're spraying your neighbor's house for ants and whatever. And I'm like, I don't want it because it harms animals. And they're like, oh no, it's safe for the pets. And I'm like, ants are animals. Like, I don't want them killed either.
Right. It's a challenge.
So your goals are to obviously monitor biodiversity and to get people outside, and then also community build, you mentioned as well. Can you talk about how you're doing that?
Well, so I think it's probably important to point out that the process for joining a City Nature Challenge begins in the summertime, and the organizers will say to returning organizers, okay, it's time to start thinking about setting up a challenge. And they encourage, new cities that haven't done it before to do it. And so typically, from what I can tell, the organizer will be like a Courtney or Kristen, involved with a city. They have a job, and this is something that they can do to help build community, to encourage people to get out, and document biodiversity. For me, I'm just a citizen. And I went to all these different conservation-related organizations and said, hey, would you be interested in doing it? And they just had capacity issues. Yeah, it's a great idea, but, we can't do it. Mm-hmm. So I simply said, well, would you encourage me to find out information about it and then create a platform that your organization can use for its own purpose. I'll do all the hard work. So that's the way that I'm approaching it. I'm just providing a platform for all of the other people who are doing so much good work. And we could have another podcast for me to just name them all, because they're giants in the community, right? And if I start naming them, I'm sure that I'd miss some, and I don't want to do that. But it's primarily for these organizations to find ways to incorporate this into their own programming. So
If someone is interested in starting one in their city, what should they do? Should they reach out to one of the people that you've mentioned or their local museum? How could they start?
I think, um, the easiest thing to do would just be to go to the City Nature Challenge website, citynaturechallenge.org. And really, I mean, it's amazing, how much work that they've already done for you and how they've laid out the steps in such a logical and easy sequence. It's amazing how easy it is to organize one. And they say to new organizers, look, we know you've never done one before. We know you're nervous, that you're going to make mistakes, but the point is to just do it. Just do it, and you'll learn. And next year it'll be better. And we're here to help you. We have this group of other organizers that are willing to help. There's a Slack group that you can join. They have regular Zoom meetings and asynchronous meetings every month to just help you, make the steps along the way. It's amazingly easy, even for someone like me. If I can do it, anybody can do it.
Well, I looked at the website that you organized, and it's very well organized, or the Facebook page,
Oh, well, thank
or
you.
group page. So it might be different this year because of COVID, or last year because of COVID, but are there in-person events? So are there, like, for example, maybe a bat biologist, like Miss Nutting Bats, or just if somebody doesn't want to hike alone, are there like groups that they can join that they can do it together?
There has been at least one other, well, two Bioblitzes in the county in the past, and both of those have been in-person events where you had somebody knowledgeable that would walk with you to help you identify specific species. And I think, as a general rule, looking at other City Nature Challenge sites, that there are a lot of in-person events. But we don't plan to have any. We are going to take advantage of Zoom, and we're going to record trainings via Zoom and make those available to people. And then to make available all of the other wonderful resources that the City Nature Challenge organizers have created. But the idea then, at this time, since it's the first time, all we want people to do is just go out into your backyards with your iPad or your iPhone or your, smart device, and start there. And then that's simple enough. And then if we do organize another Bioblitz in the summer, and in the fall, maybe the COVID situation will be different, and then we'll be able to organize some in-person events. But the idea, again, we're just going to take a baby step and encourage people to just document what's in their own backyard.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I did have one more question. Oh, do you know of any discoveries that were found from the City Nature Challenge, like the past ones? Do you know if there were any new species or unexpected species or things like that.
Certainly, if you research city nature challenges at all, you can see any number of different instances where that's been the case. But for me, no, I haven't. I haven't been.
No, right. I was just wondering in past ones and other cities if you knew of like
Oh,
specific examples.
I can't think of a specific example, but I remember reading pretty recently about a species of lizard that someone had found. Um,
A new species or a rediscovered
no,
species?
a new species.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. That's
Yeah.
pretty impressive for a lizard because
Yeah.
usually when we think of new species, we think of really small things. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll never know what you'll find. I was really surprised to know, honestly, that new species are being discovered here, even in urban areas. I worked for Rob Dunn under the Students Discover grant. He was the one who ran it, and he has a lab here, and part of it is on urban biodiversity. And he studies ants, and his students study ants, and they've discovered new species here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And they have some ant work in the medians of Manhattan, actually, like those little strips that just have like a tree or something.
Right.
They've done ant research there. I can't remember if they discovered new species or not, but the whole point is, when I was growing up, I thought as a scientist, you know everything, and that everything is more or less discovered, except maybe in like the middle of the rainforest or these deep pockets in the world where people don't go that frequently. But scientists, I think, have been pretty slow to study the nature really around us, and especially in cities. So there's still a lot of really cool things out there waiting for
Yeah.
people to find them.
Oh, yeah.
Or that indigenous people know about that we don't know
Right.
about. That's not documented to science.
Well, I think you know that I'm really interested in watersheds and
Mm-hmm.
quality monitoring, and I sat in on a Zoom presentation for macro invertebrates in Glacier National Park. And it's amazing how little we know, just about that ecosystem and about the biodiversity of macro invertebrates just at different altitudes along the same stream. And they're finding new ones all the time. It's just amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me. Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Well, I was going to say that maybe a title for this podcast would be Blame It on Baba. He was another a major influence of mine. In the end, we will conserve only what we love. We will love only what we understand. We will understand only what we are taught. So thank you for being an educator and bringing people together. And maybe one last quote. I just came across this the other day in an article titled Sounds of Silence. Extinction is erasing the earth's music. They quoted someone by the name of Jana Macy, and she said, "You don't have to do it all. Other people are working all around the world on the same causes you believe in. Find them, join up with them. You'll find your place in the choir. Choose what you love and devote yourself to it. That's enough."
I love that. What a great way to end. Thank you again so much, and I hope you win the the Triad City Challenge and the Whole Nature Challenge. That would be awesome for your first time.
Thank you. I appreciate it.